Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P. Joe Pisapia. That, of course, is Andrew Erickson, and it's you. And today, it's all about the start and sit of Week 11, and we brought in a heavy hitter when it comes to guests. That's right. He was actually here a few weeks ago, but I was not, and I was very upset about this. So we brought him back because I want to hang out with Matthew Freedman from FTN. He's one of my favorite people in the industry, and despite interactions in the past, we've never actually done a show together, so this is a special event for me. I'm very excited. He is a very hard to get person because he is just so in demand in the industry. It's very tough. I had to go through his agent, but Matthew, it is so nice to have you here on the show today, my friend.
Thanks for having me, but I don't appreciate that you pulled back the curtain. I don't like people knowing how much of a diva I am. It's, I want people to think that I'm easy to get. I'm approachable, and then I have my agent slam the door in their face. That's the way I like to do business, but that's how it is.
Yes, the public persona and the private persona are very different when it comes to Matthew Freedman. And look, you should have seen the list of needs, quote unquote, that he needed to come on the show today. I mean, all the, the blue M&Ms only. We can only record from this time to this time. I got to send him after the show some sort of gift basket. It's a lot. It's very complicated. Speaking of the holidays and whatnot, Andrew Erickson, we're getting close to the holidays. Thanksgiving's coming around. Are you a gift basket guy? Speaking of gift baskets, you like a good gift basket?
Yeah, I mean, I like a gift basket. It depends on what's in it, though. Like, what kind of gift basket? We're talking like a festive thing with like chocolates, or are we talking like...
I'll let you build the basket. How's that, buddy?
I mean, I'm a big fan of like pancake mix and like syrups and that kind of stuff.
You're the brunch basket guy.
Yes,
I like that.
That's what
Freedman,
I want.
did you know that he's the brunch basket guy? Did you know that?
I did not know that. I was too busy admiring the NFT of a blue M&M that you sent me as part of it. It's wonderful. Absolutely love it. But I feel like any sort of basket, if it's a gift basket, it's hard to go wrong unless there's just nothing in it. Otherwise, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you got the wine baskets, you got, a lot of different things here. So, we should really have we should get some kind of sponsorship for gift baskets at this point, the way I'm pushing them. But look, we've got a lot of great stuff for you today. And before we kick things off here officially, I want to do a special shout out to one of our listeners because we have the most amazing listeners here at Fantasy Pros. It's like a family. It's like a community. Great people. And one of our great listeners sent me this. He's in the Air National Guard over there in Hawaii, and he shall remain nameless because he asked to, but he was so thankful that I answer all of his questions all the time on social media that he sent me one of the patches, and you could see it here on the YouTube channel all the way there from this wonderful pilot of ours. I know last week was Veterans Day, so I just want to shout out to him and shout out to all of our veterans, male and female, who are out there protecting us and doing such incredible work, and how nice it is when people do nice things. So thank you for listening, and again, we appreciate your service. It's a very cool thing. Andrew, did anyone send you anything? No, I get all the cool stuff. That's right, buddy. All right, before we kick things off today, I want to remind everybody that our Start Sit Assistant is available at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. That's where you can go to get instant recommendations on your team's best lineup for the week. You see the percentage of experts who would start and sit each player on your roster, and you can edit and set your lineup straight from my playbook, which is a huge time saver, especially this time of year with all the holidays going on. It's great to just be on one spot, be on my playbook, set all your lineups in one spot, in one site, not have to go to ESPN, to CBS, and Yahoo, and all these other places. No. And you get instant email if your lineup changes before kickoff, too, and that's a great feature. Also, don't forget about Autopilot, which is also part of my playbook at Fantasy Pros. That will set your lineup automatically, save you time, especially if you're in a ton of leagues, and also automatically swap guys in and out if somebody's inactive, and basically takes care of you when you can't take care of your lineup. So Start Sit Assistant and Autopilot are both available, of course, at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. So as we always do, we will kick things off with the running back position here today, and we'll start with the guys in the top 20. And Matthew Freedman, since you're the guest, and I'm contractually obligated here from your agent to ask you first, please, you tell me, who in the top 20 are you a little concerned with this week that you think might not be the greatest play, but you might have to play them anyway because running back is basically a cesspool right now?
Well, it's interesting. I'm a little bit worried about Elijah Mitchell. Obviously, like if he's active, he's a guy that you sort of have to start based on how he's performed to this point in the season. I mean, he's basically the new Raheem Mostert. I've really been impressed by what we've seen when he's been out there, he's dominated touches within that backfield, but he did suffer that finger injury last week. He has had surgery on the finger. Kyle Shanahan, I mean, I think against all logic, is hoping that he's able to play this week. Give the guy a break. He's hoping he practices this week. He doesn't need practice. Just let his hand rest for a couple of days, then maybe see if he can take a handoff. Anyway, if Elijah Mitchell is out there, I feel as if I have to start him because of what he's done. But Jeff Wilson had 10 carries last week. Jeff Wilson has historically been a really good change of pace back who's had a lot of production with not many opportunities. I'm worried that Elijah Mitchell will be active. I will want to start him. And then Jeff Wilson is going to pull the Shanahan and come in and be the lead back. And Mitchell has like 5 carries. So I'm worried about that situation. And then there's also the possibility that Mitchell is just inactive this week because of the hand injury. So I feel like there are a lot of different ways to look at the Mitchell situation and to think like, either way, if he's out, I don't know if I'm going to be able to replace him. If he's in, he might not produce the way that he has produced to this point in the year.
Matthew, when you look back at last year in that run that Jeffrey Wilson had, where he was, touching the football 20 times a game there to close out the end of the season, what happens if Wilson has that sort of a game, whether it's the inactive Eli Mitchell or maybe just the not 100% Eli Mitchell kind of fading into the background? What happens then?
Look, I don't know if we're even going to be alive tomorrow. Okay, that's all right. So why ask me a question like that?
Well, because you're the Oracle. I'm supposed to ask you things. It says it right here in the contract. I'm looking at what your agent sent me, and it said the Oracle. So I thought you could see the future.
I mean, with Kyle Shanahan, like, who knows? Who really knows? But I would expect that based on the history he has with Jeffrey Wilson, and if Wilson does a Wilson-esque type of thing where he has 20 carries and he turns that into 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, that it at best for Mitchell at best is a split backfield, and at worst it could just be Wilson as the guy and Mitchell now as the change of pace who has lost his role. Like, that is conceivable, but with Shanahan, we never know with Shanahan.
All right, Andrew, let's go over to you and see who you are a little worried about going into week 11 at the running back position in that top 20 group.
Well, what we do know about Kyle Shanahan is that Elijah Mitchell could have his hand amputated and he would still start over Trey Sermon. So we can definitely at least confirm that Trey Sermon is still a zero factor in this backfield. So Jeff Wilson potentially could get the start. I like that call by Freedman. So my guy is Myles Gaskin. And it's weird because you look at the matchup, you're like, oh, Jets, like, this is perfect. Most fantasy points allowed per game to running backs. And it's like by a wide margin, 9 more fantasy points per game than the second worst team, which is the Seahawks. So it's like, Gaskin, let's fire him up. But 18.7 touches over the last 4 weeks with no Malcolm Brown, so he's getting the work. But then you look at the box score and see, he had 20 carries against the Texans for 34 yards. It's like this Miami Dolphins team cannot run block, so they're not opening up any type of holes for Myles Gaskin. So he could be a better running back, but at the same time he's not getting a lot of help. So he's in a situation where, just kind of when you zoom out, he's seeing all the work and he's playing the worst defense in the league against running back. So that should mean he should have a really great day. But just the situation he is in from the offensive point of view is just tough. So Gaskin, I wish I could rank higher, but I know that he's limited by the offense he's in. And even if with Tua under center, I think they are going to be able to move the ball better, but it doesn't mean they're going to be able to rush the ball effectively.
It's funny, Andrew. Myles Gaskin was my original one, and I took him out because he was at 20 yesterday when I was putting the show together, and I thought, well, that's kind of cheating. So I'm just going to tell you you're kind of cheating because he's like at 19 and 20. But 100%, everything you're saying is correct. You just can't trust him. It's a very difficult situation. For me, Saquon Barkley is that guy for me, and if Saquon Barkley's on the field, he's in my lineup, and I have a few shares, so I will have him in the lineup, but here we are, he's ranked 14th, and his first game back, quote-unquote, is going to be now against the Tampa Bay Bucks run defense that is coming off a loss, and they're in a primetime game. Like, this is probably the worst set of circumstances you could probably ask for in a return. I don't know if I could think of one that's any worse, but here we are, and it's a very difficult situation. You have to build into your lineup, again, in that flex position, be very smart of how you make adjustments, because if Barkley is limited in terms of the touches, that hurts him even further on top of the matchup. So it almost compounds the problem. And if you are an embarrassment of riches, like if you're in a 10-team league and you got running back depth and Barkley's an extra piece, I can even understand waiting one more week just to see, but most of us here in the real world don't have that sort of luxury. So unfortunately, that is not the case. Let's switch gears to some of the guys in the RB3 conversation / flex area that we feel good and bad about. Let's start with two guys that we want to start, because let's try to be positive here about running back, because there's a lot of negatives. Andrew, give me two guys that you feel good about starting this week who are on that fringe in that RB3 / flex spot.
Yeah, I'm going to be rolling with some Deontay Foreman this week, unfortunately. It's a good matchup for the Titans running backs. You have the Houston Texans, who rank second in rushing yards allowed to running backs this year, and Foreman has started to look like he's going to be the guy. Again, it's still a very muddled backfield. McNichols is still involved in the passing game. Him and Peterson are still kind of neck and neck in terms of snaps and carries, but we did see Foreman kind of go on an upward trajectory after the first game that they played. Foreman played more snaps, had more carries. Peterson is still getting work near the goal line, which is obviously concerning, because if you guys score a touchdown, then you're kind of your fantasy day is salvaged. So there is a scenario where Peterson, does outscore Foreman, even if Foreman is the more productive rusher. I just think that he's shown the most, juice, I guess would be the best way to put it. I mean, Peterson looks like he's running in cement or whatever. However you would depict a running back running not fast is Adrian Peterson. So I think that Foreman, he had a couple big plays. He had a big play in the receiving game last week. He was the best rusher in the first game that they all played together after Derrick Henry's injury. So yeah, and it's a revenge game for Deontay Foreman against the Houston Texans, who drafted him a few years back. So I think that he's going to be my highest ranked Titans running back. So that's sort of who I would play if someone was like, do I play Peterson? Do I play Foreman? I would probably play Deontay Foreman over the 40-year-old Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, well, I could tell you this. It would be nice. I remember a couple years ago when he tore that Achilles, I was so excited for Foreman that year, and I thought, this is going to be a guy, right? He could actually be this dude that nobody sees coming, and Houston's kind of done this before to us, and then, nope, hasn't happened. So I'm looking forward to this. I hope it works out. So that's one guy you want to start. Give me another guy that you feel good about, Andrew.
Yeah, so I think that someone you could probably look at as maybe like a potential RB2 option is Kenyan Drake for the Raiders. And I think that's something that kind of got undersold in that game that they had last played against the Chiefs was, Jalen Richard was like playing so much in that game. Like we were like, where's Kenyan Drake? And I was especially looking at Kenyan Drake because I had an over on his receiving prop and he was literally not on the field like at all. And I'm like, where's Kenyan Drake? Like who's 31? Like that's not Kenyan Drake. But Jalen Richard had to leave that game with a rib injury, and actually Drake like had a catch like towards the end of the game. So I unfortunately did not, it came close, but I did not hit the over on my receiving prop. But I do think that we see Drake get back involved in the passing game. And that's really been how teams have attacked the Bengals defense this year. It's been through the running backs in the passing game. Running backs have seen the most targets and the second most receptions against the Bengals this season. And I know that there's that one massive game that Najee Harris had against the Bengals that does kind of skew the stats a little bit. But even after that game, like they still have given up a lot. Like the Michael Carter games was against the Bengals with Mike White just like dumping it down to the running back. Mm-hmm. So it's inviting for the running backs to be used in the passing game. That's Drake's role as a Raider. So I think that he's an interesting guy here as someone that kind of runs a route, around 50% of the dropbacks. And same thing for Josh Jacobs. I think Jacobs, we could also see a spike in receiving production in this matchup.
All right, so you've got Kenyan Drake and Foreman. Mr. Freedman, who are two guys in this area of RB after RB 24 and all the way to 40 that you feel good about starting this week?
I mean, the answer, I feel good. I don't feel good about starting any of the guys. No one wants to start any of these guys. This is sort of like the scenario of like, man, my season hasn't gone according to plan, and I'm hoping I can put this guy in here and he won't destroy my chances of winning this week. That's where we are with
low bar,
all of
Freedman.
the guys. Yeah, it really is. It is a low bar. I'm just trying to get to Thanksgiving, okay? All right? But the guys that I feel maybe the least disgusting towards in this range, Jordan Howard and Devonta Freeman. And there are a lot of guys in this range that I would sort of call like contingent guys. Mm-hmm. Like if this one player isn't active, then I'm interested in this guy. So we have Jordan Howard. Miles Sanders is eligible to return from IR this week. We don't know yet if he will or won't. And so if we see Sanders out for another week, Howard really intrigues me. Not because I think he's a good player, but the Eagles have been so run heavy for the past few weeks, and Howard actually has gotten it done. He's had 41 carries, 211 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns over those past 3 games. Now, it's a horrible matchup that he has going against the Saints, who are number 1 in defensive rush success rate. So, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not pretty. On paper, it is not pretty. But there aren't many guys that you can look at in this range who have a pretty decent chance of getting 10 to 12 carries and whatever goal line opportunities come towards the offense. So that's what I'm looking at in this range. And then Devonta Freeman, it's a similar situation. Latavius Murray, he has that ankle injury. He's been out for a while. It's uncertain if he's returning this week. If he doesn't, then I think we see Freeman do something pretty along the lines of what he's done the past 4 weeks to this point, where he's had 233 yards, 3 touchdowns on 36 carries and 12 targets. That's not bad. And the Bears are number 28 in defensive rush EPA per play. So on the ground is not a bad matchup for Freeman. We just have to wait and see. Is Sanders active? Is Latavius Murray active? If those guys are out, Howard and Freeman they're guys I would be okay rolling with if my team has no better options.
There are a lot of caveats there, but I think the thing you hit on the head there is absolutely the contingency. So many of these guys are contingent, whether they're guys returning from injury, guys who have another player who's returning alongside of them from injury. There's a lot going on there. And Freeman's a guy that I'm starting in a few leagues. And Andrew, you and I have talked about Freeman, all the way going back, I think it was the Charger game, right? Where Baltimore just blew their doors off. And we said, it's funny. I feel like Devonta Freeman looks like the best of all these running backs that they've recycled and brought in, which, once again, the bar not very high. But if it's enough to get you by, as Matt is saying, you just get your points and get out and hope you get a W. Right now, that's what you want. So, Matthew, tell me about sitting guys. Who are 2 guys that you do not feel good about, even if all the contingencies kind of break their way, that you're just not going to put them in your lineup this week?
Yeah, J.D. McKissic and Chris Carson. Carson, for the obvious reason, tough matchup, returning from injury, has the neck issue. The Seahawks offense looked really bad, and granted, they should be better this week than they were last week. It would be hard for them to be worse, but Carson, I don't know if it's even guaranteed that he really is the true lead back when he returns. Like, he will probably be the number 1, but I think it will be the number 1 in a committee with Alex Collins taking more work than we would have expected when Chris Carson opened the season as the locked-in lead guy. And then J.D. McKissic, I don't know. I just don't like low ceiling pass catching backs in offenses that aren't really doing much. I'm fine staying away from McKissic.
All right, Andrew, let's go back over to you. Give me 2 guys that you want to sit this week in this RB3 conversation.
I don't want to play any Bills running backs. Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, Matt Breida, don't care. Last week they all scored touchdowns because they were playing the Jets, because that's what happens when you play the Jets. All your running backs just score fantasy points. But they each had 6 to 8 touches, and that's not going to be the case here against the Colts. I mean, the Colts, it's a whole reversal in terms of the matchup. Colts are the second best team in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to running backs this year, where the Jets were dead last. So, last week was like best case scenario with a 3-headed backfield. So if all these 3 guys are active again, it's already an offense that doesn't feature the running back position at all anyway. You attack the Colts through the air, and the Bills are going to be like, okay, sick. Like, we'll throw the ball. Like, we don't want to use our running backs anyway, so thank you, Indianapolis. We appreciate it. So, yeah, definitely out on the Bills running backs. And then, just to kind of mimic what Freeman said, I don't want to play Alex Collins. Even if Chris Carson comes back, if he doesn't come back, Alex Collins has been terrible over the last couple of weeks. He's only averaging like 5.5 fantasy points per game. He's capped out at 10 carries in his last 2 matchups. 0 involvement in the pass catching game. They're using Travis Homer, DJ Dallas. And again, question marks about the offense. Like, is Russ going to get back cooking? Like, what's going on? So Alex Collins is kind of like a gross play to me. And even if he is like a starting running back, it's like, there's probably a chance that one of these backup running backs, gets there by way of pass catching or something like that, as opposed to using a guy like Alex Collins, he's just a jack. Like, at this point, like, he had a couple good games early on because he was seeing like 20 carries, and that's not really no longer the case anymore.
Andrew, I want to ask you this question and follow up, because I agree with you that Alex Collins does feel more like just a guy, right? That I think we're on the same page with. But how much do you attribute the lack of fantasy points also to Geno Smith running this offense these last few weeks, and then obviously Russell Wilson first week back with all the rust and everything. How much do you attribute to that? And is there any saving grace for anybody in the backfield in Seattle with Russell Wilson second week back now from the injury?
Well, I mean, the Geno Smith lit up the Jaguars. Like, they had a really good game in that game, and
true.
And Alex Collins still didn't do anything. So I don't think it's really too much of a difference. I mean, again, if the Seahawks score 40 points, then Alex Collins should, theoretically have a solid fantasy day. But, who knows if he's getting those touchdowns. It's, the Seahawks are so concentrated with, what player blows up. It seems like it's only one because of how slow they run. Like, they don't run a lot of plays. So it's like, it's either a Lockett week or a Metcalf week. Like, they don't have enough plays to run for everybody to eat in the offense except for one player. And if I'm making a bet, like, I'm going to bet on one of these receivers, like having a bounce back game and not Alex Collins. And I think that's something that we all probably agree on. That we're not going to push the chips in on an Alex Collins. We'd rather do it on a Lockett or a Metcalf.
All right, let's play a little game here. Who should I start? It is the game that's sweeping the nation. Everybody loves it. It's part of our Who Should I Start tool that's over at my playbook at Fantasy Pros. I'm going to give you two guys here. You guys tell me who you want to start between these two, and I'll tell you what the expert consensus percentage is of who they want to start. And in classic 2021 fashion, when it comes to running backs, literally 37 seconds ago, Andy Reid says Chiefs could wait until week 13 on CEH, and CEH was one of the two guys we were going to throw into this mix. So I guess we'll just get rid of that one because that's probably not going to be useful. Let's do the other one we have, which is Jordan Howard versus Tony Pollard. So here you go, Mr. Freedman. Jordan Howard, Tony Pollard, who would you start?
I guess I have to stay on brand and say it's Jordan Howard. I mean, it's disgusting. What I do like about Tony Pollard is he has a pretty reasonable matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, and Pollard is getting pretty regular usage, so he has a higher floor, and with his efficiency, he actually has a decent ceiling. But I have Howard ranked ahead of him, so that's just what I'm going to go with.
All right, so there you go. So Howard for Matt. How about for you here, Andrew? Which of those two?
I'm going to go with Pollard. I'd like Pollard's work as a receiver. Like, that's something Jordan Howard doesn't have. Like, he doesn't have any work in the passing game. So even if Zeke is still involved, they're just working in tandem. I like Pollard that he can catch a screen, take it to the house in a high scoring environment. So I think I'll chase the upside a little bit with Pollard over Howard for me.
All right. It's actually 50-50. That's right. A dead split right now among experts, just like on the show here. So I guess it's all on my shoulders. It's all up to me right now. And I listened to Matt talk about, all of these, Jordan Howard, but it's such a tough matchup. It's not really good. He's kind of gritting his teeth. I'm going to go with Tony Pollard. I'm going to play the total here in this game. I don't know how much defense is going to be in this contest between the Chiefs and the Cowboys. I'm going to guess not too much, and certainly not enough to hurt the total. So I'm going to go with the upside of Pollard there as well. I'll throw another one out here on the fly since the one with CH is no longer available. Let's talk about Devonta Foreman and Kenyan Drake. So Foreman and Drake, two guys we've talked about. Let's put the money where the mouth is, Erickson. Which of these two guys, if you can only start one, would you rather start?
I'm checking my rankings because I don't know where I have them ranked. I definitely have them close to each other.
You're filibustering. You're stalling for time here, Erickson.
Yeah, I think I'll go with Kenyan Drake because Foreman. I really like.
Your heart and your head are at a struggle right now. I can feel it.
It's tough because I can see him having a bigger role, but there's no guarantee he has any role. Like, they could just be like, oh no, we're gonna roll with Adrian Peterson this week.
I think you said it, Andrew, which was if they had kept losing games, maybe they would say we got to reevaluate. Let's get Foreman the ball more. Let's simplify things. But because they keep winning, it's almost like they don't need to commit. I think it was you who said that. If not, I'm going to give you credit for it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I read something on Titans.com. I was just trying to figure out if there was any inkling about getting Foreman more work, and it seems at least to the people that are in the know with the Titans have noticed that Foreman has looked like the best running back, and that they are kind of approaching by game basis. So for me, it's all right, if they're up big on the Texans, then they should use their bruising running back. So I think it makes sense for Foreman, but again, he's not really someone that's going to be involved as much in the passing game. You're hoping he gets a screen pass, whereas Drake, I think Drake probably has a safer floor because Foreman we don't really know what his role is going to be at all. We're hoping he gets the work, but that may not be the case whatsoever. He may not also get any touchdown equity, so I'd probably go with Drake.
Devonta Foreman or Kenyan Drake, Matthew Freedman? Who would you rather start?
Foreman, and for me, it's pretty convincing. And in part, maybe I'm reading too much into how he was used last week, but with the 11 carries he wasn't productive on the 11 carries, but he did out carry Adrian Peterson, just 2 targets, but he was productive. Now, granted, like it's a sample of 2 targets, so I'm not going to read too much into it, but he did look like the best back and he did have the most volume. Mm-hmm. And I think he's going to increasingly push Adrian Peterson, who has just 2.3 yards per carry. Like, Adrian Peterson has looked like a guy who should have stayed retired. I think he continues to push Adrian Peterson to the sideline, and he eventually just takes not the full Derrick Henry role, but something that's pretty close to what we would have imagined if it's Henry with McNichols and maybe Henry's injured, so he's not playing as much. Something like that. I think that is the split we eventually get with Adrian Peterson being cut in a couple of weeks.
Well, the split when it comes to our experts is Kenyan Drake 59% to 41% for Foreman. So there you have it. So they lean with Andrew Erickson. I'm sure that something's wrong there, Freedman. I'm sure I'll go back and check the math and figure that out, because you made a very convincing argument. And I feel like Andrew wanted to say Foreman, and
it's close. It's definitely close.
Well, that's why I pick them. This is what I do. I pick the guys who are close. All right, let's talk about the wide receivers here. Andrew, let's start with you. Give me a wide receiver in the top 30 heading into week 11 that you are concerned with, that you might be fading this week, but you might have to start anyway.
Yeah, for me, it's Michael Pittman for the Indianapolis Colts. We saw Carson Wentz kind of come back down to earth last week after a really hot streak. Like, he was really consistent, scoring fantasy points as like a top 12 guy every single week. Came back to earth against the Jaguars, pretty easy matchup, and now he gets, arguably the toughest matchup you could ask for a quarterback in the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills are the number 1 team in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers this season, so they've been shutting down opposing passing games. And look, Michael Pittman's been getting there because of efficiency, not necessarily like crazy volume, because the Colts are a run-first team. Now, if they're playing with a negative game script, they're going to have to throw the football a little bit more, so I don't think Pittman totally duds out your lineup, but in terms of what he's been doing based on the volume he's getting, he's actually performed the most over expectation among all wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. So when we see things like that, it usually means, okay, he's going to regress at some point. Seems like that would happen in the worst matchup you could ask for a wide receiver. So he's like ranked pretty high in terms of ECR, and I'm ranked significantly lower on him. I think I have him outside like my top 20 guys. Not enough to flat out bench him, because you still need some receivers. He's not going to score 0 points, but I really don't think this is like a ceiling spot for him whatsoever.
No, it is definitely a tough matchup there, but you can't take him out because he's been that good. Matthew Freedman, when it comes to the guys in the top 30, who are you concerned with this week?
DJ Moore. And it's sad to say, because I think he's got so much talent. We saw what he did in the first half of the season. He's the only wide receiver in the 2 previous years to have 1,200 yards from scrimmage each year. Like, he's a talented player. I'm just worried about what the insertion of Cam Newton into that offense might mean for DJ Moore. Now, granted, he's been playing with Sam Darnold and Phillip Walker. If you had to pick 2 quarterbacks that you would not want your prize number 1 receiver to have to play with, it might be those 2 guys. That said, he at least has some connection with them. He's played with them last year with Phillip Walker in the preseason. He's played with Darnold this year. He knows those guys. Those guys know the offense. Cam Newton doesn't know this offense. Cam Newton last year looked like a guy who had a significant shoulder issue that, even though it's been surgically repaired, has not really been repaired. And I know we didn't see much of Cam Newton this past week. He was used in particular packages. He didn't have to throw the ball downfield, but he attempted, I believe, 4 passes for 8 yards. Now, granted, like, it's near the end zone.
Right,
we shouldn't. So, but it's just, I don't know. Like, I'm not encouraged by what we've seen out of Cam Newton in the past year. And so, given all of that, I'm just going to be a little bit pessimistic about DJ Moore's opportunities. Not because of him. He's fantastic. He's number 1 in the league with the 37% market share of first read targets. Like, he is prioritized within that offense. I just don't know if Cam Newton is going to be the guy to unlock him.
Yeah, and I think everybody should be concerned about both of these guys, and it's unfortunate because these are 2 of the better wide receivers in football, and I'll throw a third one onto that pile of Terry McLaurin this week. He's ranked 16th going against the Carolina Panthers. Gilmore is back, and that Carolina D's been very good on the road. I mean, there's just a lot of situations here where you don't feel great necessarily, and you're not taking McLaurin out. I think it's hard to take Pittman out. It's certainly hard to take DJ Moore out of your lineup, but these are three guys this week that all might have a cap to their productivity, and something as you're making your lineups you might have to account for, which means we got to turn our attention and our focus to the guys at the flex position who might have some more upside that we do feel good about. So let's start with you this time, Matthew. Tell me, who are two guys you feel good about starting this week in that wide receiver flex situation that you think have some upside that you want to roll the dice with?
Okay, again, feeling good. I don't know about that, but I do like talking about these two guys. Jamal Agnew. I can't believe I'm talking about him, but I love Jamal Agnew. So Agnew, like, think of Tavon Austin when he was at his best, right? That 1 year with comparison. The Rams where he was just randomly scoring touchdowns, and it doesn't feel like it's sustainable, but he's a playmaker who's getting the ball in a variety of ways. That is what Jamal Agnew feels like. He already has 2 return touchdowns this year. He's used all the time as a return man, as a punt returner. And so he does have some potential touchdown equity as a returner. That's something that like people don't really pay attention to, but like 1 out of every 12 games, he's got a pretty decent chance of scoring a touchdown as a returner. We know he has that playmaking skill set. We saw him score a long rushing touchdown last week. Like, that's not likely to happen again, but it is something that gives him a little bit of a higher floor that each week he does have a carry or 2 coming in his direction. And then in the 5 games in which he has been used as a regular contributor in 3 wide sets, he has 35 targets. Like, he's being used within that offense, and it's not a great offense, but for someone who's, regularly available on waivers, who actually does have a playmaking skill set, if you're desperate at the position, I think he's a guy you could grab and plug in, and maybe he scores a touchdown for you. So I don't know. I think for someone who's being really undervalued or like not undervalued, but just kind of ignored, thought of as a fluky type of option, he might have more sustainability than people anticipate. And then another guy, Michael Gallup, I don't know. He's a good receiver in an offense that scores a lot of points. And if you look at a comparison of Gallup when he's had Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper when he's had Dak Prescott within that Kellen Moore offense, they're basically identical in terms of the number of yards that they get with Prescott. So I don't know. I would say, people value Amari Cooper up here and Gallup down here. I think they're a little bit closer within that offense than people give them credit for. So, Gallup as an arbitrage version of Amari Cooper, I think is someone who offers value.
I got a question for you, because I know a lot of people are talking about what happens to Dalton Schultz now that Gallup is back and healthy. And I just want to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that's an important topic that a lot of people have concerns now about that.
I think it's probably just, 2 fewer targets per game, something like that.
So not a massive hit necessarily.
So it doesn't feel like 2 targets is a massive hit, but it is enough to drop him from, let's say, like the mid-range tight end 1, where we had him ranked before, to that tight end 1, tight end 2 borderline. If you have him, you're probably still starting him. You probably don't have better options, but he's not going to have the same ceiling. At least I think, not the same ceiling that he had previously.
All right, Andrew Erickson, who are 2 guys in the wide receiver grouping outside of 36 that you feel good about starting this week?
All right, so Elijah Moore, New York Jets.
Yeah.
Wide receiver, rookie wide receiver.
Let's
got
go.
Joe Flacco under center. The Mike White era is over. The check down king has been dethroned for Joe Flacco. So hopefully we air the ball out a little bit more. Now, Flacco's not exactly the A-dot king, but he did actually have a large average depth of target last year when he was playing for the Jets. He's kind of mix and match. He's dabbled as a check down king and also a let's launch code all day. So with Elijah Moore, what I like about him is that he just continues to find ways to produce. Even though the coaching staff is refusing to let him play a full snap share, it doesn't matter. Like, he's finding ways, he's scoring touchdowns, he's being efficient, and that's what I'm looking for in wide receivers. Like, when you're looking in this range, it's never going to be perfect. Like, you're not going to find a guy who's playing every single snap, has, a 24% target share. That's not going to be the case. But with Moore, you're getting a guy who actually leads the Jets in terms of target rate per route run at the wide receiver position. So when he is running routes, he is the most targeted receiver on the New York Jets. He's got a great matchup against the Miami Dolphins, 3rd in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. And he also led the team in air yards last week. So that's something that I always try to look at and point to when you're trying to project the next week forward. Oh, who got those air yards and necessarily didn't turn them into production. Now, he did catch the garbage time touchdown, but that's kind of like what he's been doing. Like, he's been finding ways to get it done. And he got the touchdown from Flacco. Like, give him credit. He was the leading target, or he saw the most targets to Flacco in that game. He had 2 targets. So I think Elijah Moore makes a lot of sense if you're looking for upside. I know that Crowder saw 22% target share from Flacco last season, but again, it's a whole new offense. You don't know. Right. There's a lot of question marks.
And Moore wasn't there last year, so you know you really can't go by that. I'm with you, and everyone keeps bringing up the point to me every time I talk about how much I like Elijah Moore is, well, it's all garbage time, and I'm thinking to myself, is there another time that the Jets have to score points? Because I haven't seen it. If it's there, let me know. Who's the other guy for you, Andrew, that you feel good about starting this week?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are going to, even maybe this guy's on waiver wires because I think people picked him up and then dropped him, is Donovan Peoples-Jones on the Browns. But, and this is something I actually advocated to sit him last week. I was not buying into, he made a lot of big plays, but he was playing the Patriots. Like, they were going to put J.C. Jackson on him, and it was not going to work out well. And that's why he did it. Like, he was coming off a game with 3 targets. So I didn't understand, like, getting behind him last week in a really tough matchup. But that's not the case this week. Like, he's playing the Detroit Lions. Like, this is a team that just bleeds fantasy points to wide receivers when it comes to efficiency. Like, in terms of explosive plays, last against wide receivers. They're the worst team at giving up big plays to the wide receiver position. And that's what Peoples-Jones has been doing all year long. So he's PFF's highest graded receiver on targets of 20-plus air yards this year. So Baker Mayfield looks for him deep for big plays, and the Lions are the team that gives up the most big plays to wide receivers. So I think if you're looking for upside in your flex, your wide receiver 3 spot, I think Donovan Peoples-Jones makes a ton of sense. And really the only way I don't see him like really hitting, because he is the number 1 receiver on the outside. Like, he ran a route on 87% of the dropbacks last week, which was tied with Jarvis Landry. Landry has not been doing anything since Odell Beckham's left the offense. So, I mean, we could see DPJ lead the team in targets and receiving yards next week. So, coming off 5 targets, I think that he makes a ton of sense. And really the only way he could really fail is just the Browns don't throw the ball at all against the left. They just hand the ball to Chubb like 30 times. And, okay, like that's how he gets beat. But I think it's worth the risk to just take a shot on DPJ if you need upside. And it's also, I want to mention just one other guy. So Quez Watkins. He's kind of like in a similar situation to DPJ where he's the big play threat on the Eagles. He saw 26% target share last week, same as Devontae Smith. And I mean, if he had caught that touchdown, like Jalen Hurts hit him on a perfect ball, he just dropped it. People would have talked about Quez Watkins as like a hot waiver wire pickup. Like, oh, he's got the Saints this week. You know, they faced the second highest deep ball rate this year, but because he dropped the ball, just one play in time, if it was different, no one's talking about Quez Watkins when he's running as many routes as Devontae Smith. The matchup is great. And we were seeing with this Saints defense, it's not like the number 1 receivers that are blowing up. It's like these ancillary number 2 guys. Like last week, it was not A.J. Brown, it was Marcus Johnson. So Quez Watkins, I think, is in a spot similar to DPJ where he's kind of undervalued, but I think he could have a big game as a kind of a forgotten receiver. And we know that the Eagles are probably going to have to throw more than the Browns will. So I actually may even lean a little bit more towards Watkins because of the Saints' more pass funnel defense.
That's a great point, too. And you can throw the ball in the Saints. I think we've seen that. You go back to even a couple weeks ago and you see that Atlanta game. How Atlanta gets back in that game. How? Throwing a big deep ball at the end of Patterson, right? And all of a sudden they're back in that game. Next thing you know, they're kicking a field goal. Game's over. So let's talk about the guys that we don't like. Matthew, let's go back to you for a moment. Give me 2 guys that you want to sit who are in this wide receiver 36 and on territory.
Allen Robinson. Do I need to make any justification here?
Well, I think you do, only because look, you know how many arguments I've gotten in this year with Andrew Erickson about sitting Allen Robinson. He wants to start him, and look, last time out we saw Fields, there was progress. But how far do you want to take that progress right now? I think that's the question a lot of people have. So it is important. I will ask you to explain yourself just a little for those people who are tempted to go back to the well after what they saw 2 weeks ago.
So Justin Fields has looked good, or he's looked better, significantly better the past 2 games. The problem is that a chunk of that has come through rushing production, and that doesn't do anything for Allen Robinson. And then Darnell Mooney is still the number 1 receiver within that offense. And we're talking about an offense that isn't throwing the ball all that much anyway, is kind of playing slow, really looking to protect Justin Fields. Allen Robinson is just not getting the opportunities. I mean, like I would start Jamal Agnew over Allen Robinson.
Okay.
And I'm not even being hot takey with that. I just don't want Allen Robinson. I'll just say I'm probably a little bit biased. Like I have been anti Allen Robinson for a while because he's a high volume guy who isn't very efficient. And when you have a player like that, he can get dinged in a couple of ways. Either he somehow becomes even less efficient or he loses his volume. And we've seen both things happen to Allen Robinson this year. And so I want no part of him because I don't like the offense. And then I don't like his changed role within that offense. So even with Justin Fields producing, even with Justin Fields improving as an NFL player, I still don't think that actually means much more improvement for Allen Robinson. So entirely hands off on Allen Robinson. And then Jamison Crowder for a lot of the reasons that Andrew talked about with Elijah Moore. Like I'm interested in Elijah Moore. I don't think there are a lot of opportunities within that offense. Jamison Crowder has a decent floor. He's getting 6 targets every game, but I just don't think he's going to do much with those targets. And he might not see those targets with Elijah Moore continuing to ascend within that offense.
All right, let's head back over to you, Andrew. Give me some guys that you do not feel good about starting this week at the wide receiver position at wide receiver 3 or in the flex spot.
Russell Gage, Atlanta Falcons. I just cannot. I don't like have a personal vendetta against Gage, but like I just cannot get into this guy ever. Like it like doesn't matter. Like whenever he gets targets, I'm like just no. I've never touted him as someone to add off the waiver wire. Like I just can't do it. It's just because he's not an efficient. He's just not good. He's not an efficient receiver. So we've seen him play 4 games back from his injury. 2, he's gotten 0 catches in, so he's been 2 goose eggs. He's a 13% target share. Like. There's no reason you should be trying this guy out. And I know like the projections are going to say like, oh, well, like he's the number 1 wide receiver because Kyle Pitts is like going to get, Belichick's going to take away Pitts and the slot's going to, it's like, no, like he's just not good. Like he's not going to get it done. I hate his wide receiver cornerback matchup. Patriots slot cornerback Myles Bryant has been really good this year. He's actually PFF's highest graded cornerback from the slot playing in week 11. So yeah, Russell Gage, man, like I just can't get behind this guy. Like the only thing I can back for Russell Gage is his receiving prop unders. Like that's what I'll get on is for Russell Gage. Like that's I just can't do anything with this guy. I just can't.
All right, and look, I'll tell you what. I mean, I don't think any of us are going to argue about that. And on top of which, I'm not even worried about them stopping Kyle Pitts. If I'm the Atlanta Falcons, I'm worried about keeping Matt Ryan upright right now. I'm more worried about Matthew Judon than about anybody else right now if I'm them. But who else do you feel like you're concerned about going into this week?
I'll just mention like McCole Hardman. Basically, whenever if Mahomes throws for 400 yards and you do nothing, and you're like a receiver in that offense, I mean, it's like, come on. Like I think McCole Hardman like fetch, it's just not going to happen. It's not happening here with McCole Hardman. And then the last guy, Marquez Callaway. So he's actually ranked higher than Deontay Harris and Traquan Smith in terms of the ECR, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. If you look at last week, the routes run were for Traquan Smith, like he led the team in routes run, and he was like the focal point of them in the red zone. Like they were trying to get him red zone targets like 3 or 4 times in that game. And Deontay Harris, like, yeah, he only plays like half the snaps, but he always gets targeted when he's on the field. So without Kamara banged up, they're using him behind the line of scrimmage, getting him screens. Like he's a great playmaker, like a speedy guy. And Marquez Callaway is just kind of like left out there, kind of trying to figure out what to do. And we know that the Eagles, what are they best at? Stopping perimeter wide receivers. Like if I had to bet based on where they line up, we're going to probably see Callaway get a lot of Slay. And Slay's been really good this year. So Callaway is probably my least favorite Saints receiver. So I am surprised to see him ranked highest among the ECR, among those trio of Saints wideouts.
Would you start any Saints wideouts? Would you start Harris or Traquan Smith this week?
I think that they're both kind of like interesting, like wide receiver 4. I mean, I put them kind of in the same tier. Like talk about Peoples-Jones and Quez Watkins, but McCallaway is like the one I don't like the most. So I just am surprised that he is ranked the highest, but I would not start him. I would definitely start the other 2.
All right, fair enough there. The Saints not exactly offensive juggernaut through the air. But let's play a little game. Let's go back to who should I start, and I'm going to give you 2 guys. Andrew, I'll start with you. Jarvis Landry or Michael Gallup? Who would you rather start this week?
Yeah, I think originally I had Landry, but I think that Matt has convinced me otherwise. That it was a really good point how he talked about how the difference between Cooper and Michael Gallup is really not that different, and that kind of like that's a really sharp point. So yeah, I'm going to take Gallup playing in a really high scoring environment. Landry's had 2 weeks without OBJ and has done literally nothing. I get they're playing the Lions, but I almost think I like Peoples-Jones a little bit more as that big play maker on the outside. So I'll go with Gallup.
Do I even have to ask you, Matt, which way you're going on this one?
I feel disgusting saying it. I would go here. Let me contextualize this. I would go with Gallup for ceiling. I would go with Landry. I would go with Landry for floor. Yep. And so I normally prefer ceiling in terms of the way that I construct my lineups each week, because you're thinking of a portfolio of players. Even if a guy doesn't, if he bust, whatever, you still have 8 other guys, and his bust might not be all that bad. But I tend to focus on upside more than kind of median projection. But when you're creating rankings, you kind of have to think more about the median than about the upside. So I think if you look at my rankings, I have Landry ahead of Gallup. But in terms of who would I rather start, in most scenarios, I would rather start Gallup because of the upside.
That makes a ton of sense. And I always think that the better analysts, when you ask them questions on Twitter, or who would you rather start, this guy or this guy, all this stuff, when the analyst gives you the answer, this guy for floor, this guy for ceiling, that's a good answer. And I'll tell you why, because context matters. Context matters in your matchup. Context matters in your lineup construction as well, and what else you have. And you have to look at your lineup and guess which one you can handle, basically. And can you take a 0 from a Donovan Peoples-Jones, who does have upside, but at the same time, he could have goose egg in him as well. It's not out of the realm of possibility. So that is a very important part, and I think very important, and the better analyst will tell you that. Here's another one, kind of maybe in that same realm. Cole Beasley or Elijah Moore. Matt, we'll start with you with this one. Who would you rather start this week, Cole Beasley or Elijah Moore?
I have Beasley ahead of Elijah Moore, but I think I want to do just a little more research on this. Like, isn't
it doesn't
Beasley
feel right, does it?
Well, I think Beasley's dealing with some sort of injury issues, and so I'm not sure exactly what the availability is. I kind of want to see the practice reports. Like, I imagine that in some way I will end up tweaking his ranking as the week progresses. Right now, I have Beasley ahead of Moore. He didn't do anything last week, but the games before that, he was routinely seen in the double-digit target area. I don't know. He's in a good offense. I would have to go with Beasley here, but by the end of the week, if we have negative practice reports, I will probably have Moore ranked ahead of him.
I have Beasley at 36 this week and Moore at 37 personally. So yeah, and it feels weird because I feel like it's more exciting to start Moore. That's sure what it feels like to me. I want to start the exciting guy. Beasley's there and productive. So here we go again. Andrew Erickson, Beasley or Elijah Moore for you?
Yeah, I mean, I still like Elijah Moore. Look, I think Beasley is playing like with an injury, because he played 9 snaps last week. So I get why we're trying to figure out, what is the deal with him. And this is something that he's like, this has happened to him before already this year. Looking at his snaps, like he's been down, but no belief or underneath 50% at other times this year, but it's never been this low where he was like below like 25% of the snaps played. So it's like a really big red flag to me that it's like, look, he's an older guy. Like they have other wide receivers they can use. Like, are they going to start like limiting his snaps overall to kind of keep him fresh as they the rest of the Bills' schedule is really tough. Like they really need to kind of hunker down and make sure they have all of their guys for the long term. So it would not surprise me at all to see more Gabriel Davis, more Isaiah McKenzie, and more of those guys and less of Beasley. And if Beasley's not getting volume, then it's like you're not getting anywhere with him because that's what he needs. Like he needs the double-digit targets. He's not going to get there because he's going to catch a bunch of touchdowns. So I guess I have more kind of in there because I just think that he has a better chance of like ascending, whereas Beasley I think is really on like a downward trajectory. I think he's a guy like maybe I would try. It's tough to trade him now because he came off a bad week, but I don't know how consistent he's going to be moving forward if he's like playing through an injury.
Yeah, that's fair. Mm-hmm. Just to follow up on that, if we see multiple DNPs did not practice this week for Cole Beasley, 100% I am moving him down my rankings.
Agreed. And it's funny because this is exactly the point you made about Landry before. Beasley's the floor, Moore is the ceiling, and yet here they are neck and neck, right? In rankings. Why? Because when you're ranking guys, you're looking for a certain amount of floor because you feel good about that point total they're getting. So the experts say Cole Beasley 70% to Elijah Moore 30%. So a little bit more divisive there. And then on the other side, Landry 52% over Michael Gallup to 48%. So that one a bit closer. Let's switch gears here to the quarterback position. Matt, let's go to you and tell me about who the quarterback you are concerned with this week. Maybe who's a QB1, but maybe you're fading a little bit.
Russell Wilson. He did not look good. I think he's still dealing with an injury. I think that's a big part of it. He's within an offense that I just think is not conducive, especially with the offensive line, conducive to a lot of offensive success. With the system, they're playing slower. They're running the ball more. Pete Carroll said the main problem is that they're not running the ball enough, which is such a Pete Carroll thing to say. If there's one way you can ensure you alienate your franchise quarterback, it's by saying we need to run the ball more. We had over 4 yards per carry. We should have been running the ball more. I don't know. I'm worried about Russell Wilson with the injury and the offense. We know the upside that he has, but last week we very clearly saw the floor that he has. And I mean, it's not as if the Packers defense has played better than I would have expected without Jair Alexander being on the field. But I still don't think the Packers have a world-beating defense. They've had significant injuries, so I would have thought that the Seahawks would have been able to keep that game close, would have been able to score some points, and they simply didn't. And now he's going against an Arizona defense that I think is actually pretty good. So I don't know. I'm going to be a little bit skeptical about Russell Wilson this week, especially when there are other guys at the quarterback position that I think have pretty decent matchups who are, probably ranked a little bit lower down, but you can make a case for why you would start this guy over Russell Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson is actually my guy too, and I'm not even going to add anything because there's nothing left to add. You hit it all. And you're right about the Packers defense too. They have played a little bit better. Campbell, especially the linebacking position, has played very well this year. Andrew, how about for you as a QB1? Who are you a little sketch on this week?
I think I talk about this guy every single week in this section. It's Kyler Murray again. So they have a bye week next
every week.
Week
You've been right. So
yeah, because he's not playing. So Kyler Murray for me, I think that he has a chance of playing in this game. I think it's like Hopkins that is probably like the long shot to actually suit up for this game. Maybe they get Murray out there, but like, what have we learned about these guys coming back after long layoffs? Russell Wilson came back after a couple weeks, was terrible. Dak Prescott came back after a couple weeks, was terrible. Like, there's a pattern here, guys. Like, you don't need to like thrust him back. Oh, because he's Kyler Murray, you got to play him. It's like, no, like, let him show you that he's back to himself. Let him show you that I am Kyler Murray. I am going to run the football with my legs. Let him do that. Like, you don't need to like be a hero and be like, no, I need to play Kyler Murray. So I don't want to play Murray even if he is healthy, or active, I should say, because I don't know like what he's going to be like, and there may not be Hopkins out there either, so that also hurts his upside. So I know the matchup is good against the Seahawks, but I'm still trying to get away from Kyler Murray even if he is active.
Let's jump to the who should I start tool real quick, and let's talk about Russell Wilson versus Ryan Tannehill. So Tannehill has the matchup against Houston, which, once again, that's what you were kind of highlighting there, Matthew, before, which is, well, look, there's some guys out there in that fringe of QB1 who have good matchups. Is this indicative of that? Would you start Tannehill over Wilson?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would ultimately say I need to consult my rankings, but they're going to be close. They're going to be close. And you mentioned the matchup, and one thing that Tannehill does have going for him, I would go with looking at this, it makes me want to bump Wilson down as I'm looking at my rankings and bump Tannehill up a little bit. Tannehill, granted, the offense would be a little bit different without Derrick Henry, but in Tannehill's starts, the Titans are 28-11-1 to the over. So like we just consistently for the past 2.5 years have seen Titans games go over and produce more total points than we would anticipate. That has historically benefited Ryan Tannehill, who now has that great matchup. Tannehill has actually done historically very well within division going against these weak AFC teams. He's got that matchup this week. I would probably go with Tannehill.
How about you, Andrew? Would you start Tannehill against Houston over Russell Wilson against Arizona?
Yeah, no, 100%. I would go Ryan Tannehill. If you look at, Russell Wilson, even before he got hurt, he wasn't like lighting the world on fire. Like, he had 2 top 8 finishes this year, Russell Wilson. Ryan Tannehill has 2 top 8 finishes over the last 3 weeks. Like Tannehill's already been just as good. I mean, we like Wilson, but like Tannehill's good. And the reason this matchup would always kind of be you'd have Tannehill on the fringes because, oh, well, it's going to be Derrick Henry, like 30 carry, 200-yard game. Like, Tannehill's not going to be able to get that. Like, that's not in the range of outcomes anymore. Like, if they score points, it's probably going to be because of Tannehill, not because of the hodgepodge of running backs that they have. So I like Tannehill a lot. I mean, he's playing Houston, and there is no Derrick Henry. So there's no, like, cop-out with, oh, Derrick Henry's going to score all the fantasy points. Like, no, like, the offense is going to go through Ryan Tannehill. So I like Tannehill a lot more than Wilson.
All right, let's go through some of the other guys who are on that fringe of QB1. You got Tannehill, Kirk Cousins. Let's take Tannehill even out of the conversation. Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Mac Jones, Cam Newton, back-to-back again after all this time, and Justin Fields. Andrew, of those guys, if you had to pick one you feel confident in, Cousins, Carr, Jones, Newton, Fields, who would it be?
I mean, the fact that we're already ranking Cam Newton over Justin Fields, who's already showed us back-to-back weeks of top 10 quarterback. Like, what does he have to do? He's starting to turn around. Like, he's running the ball a ton, 57 rushing yards over his last 4 starts. Like, this is what we were hoping for from this mobile rookie quarterback, and it just took a couple weeks to get off the ground, but it's starting to finally happen for Justin Fields coming off the bye week. So I have him as a top 10 quarterback. I don't know why he's at 17. That doesn't make any sense to me. He's showing the rushing floor. He's starting to pass the ball a little bit more. And I think the matchup is there. I mean, the Ravens rank 5th in fantasy points per game allowed to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. Their defense gives up a lot of big plays. Like, there are guys running wide open. Like, there are guys running wild. He's got good weapons. I like Justin Fields a lot. And, I mean, the fact that we're already just like, oh, Cam Newton, got to put him in over. Like, I think that's too aggressive on Cam Newton, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I don't know who this we is you're talking about where you have Cam Newton over Fields, because it ain't me.
Yes.
I'm with you. I've seen enough Cam Newton, please. I'm done. I'm over it. How about you, Matthew? When you look at this grouping of QBs here, the Mac Jones, Newton, Fields, Carr, Cousins, does one of these guys stand out on this fringe of QB1 to you besides Tannehill?
Yeah, I'm going to be the argumentative jerk and say Cam Newton.
Awesome.
And I think
But wait a minute, weren't you just the same guy who just talked about the shoulder surgery and he doesn't look, he's got a spaghetti arm and now you want to throw him out there?
Yeah, it's
ugly.
It's
points.
Not like I want to. It's a couple things. He gets points with his legs. Right. Last year, even though he was splitting snaps with Jarrett Stidham, which doesn't help my case. I'll just say that. Even though he was splitting snaps with Jarrett Stidham, he still led the position with carries inside the 5-yard line. So, and we already saw him get that, very easy goal line touchdown. And so, like, I think he has that within his arsenal. He's going against a Washington defense that has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. That, for me, is one of the big factors, is that it's just a really forgiving matchup that he has. And with the Konami code ability that he has with his legs, and we saw him, even though he wasn't good last year, we still saw him have some pretty decent performances. I can see him being on the fringe of that QB1, QB2 borderline. Justin Fields, he has looked good in 2 games, but he looked horrible before that, and Matt Nagy is still his head coach. That's like,
that's
fair.
That's fair. You talk about the Konami code thing, though, but Cam Newton to me feels more like the guy who, the arcade games where it's missing a button, you go to play, you're all excited, and the button's not there, and you can't fire or do anything. That kind of feels like some of the buttons are there. Not all the buttons are there when it comes to Cam Newton in a lot of ways, but interesting discussion points, and there you had both takes on Cam Newton, which is good, and on Fields, which is productive for everybody else to hear. How about Superflex? It's gross this week. Brace yourselves. Taylor Heineke, Tyrod Taylor, Baker Mayfield, Trevor Siemian, Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, Freedman. Which of these guys is the best of the worst?
I mean, I don't know if I even pronounce his name right. I think it's pronounced Tyrod instead of Tyrod. I think I spent
it's Tyrod Taylor, I believe.
It's actually Ty God. Let's be honest.
I think it should be to God. Okay, so to God Taylor, that's the guy I'm going with. He was horrible last week horrible in week 9 in his return to action, and then he had the bye in week 10. My hope is that he will be sharper coming out of the bye. The hamstring injury is further in the distance. The Titans are number 4 in most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Now, the Titans defense has been better of late. I still don't look at that defense and think you are a good defense. So with Brandon Cooks there as a guy who is number 2 in the league in air yards, Taylor he doesn't have a great arm, but he has shown the willingness to throw the ball down the field. the Titans is a team that can be exploited deep. Taylor having, some rushing ability. He's not the runner he used to be, but he's still a pretty good runner. And I'll just say this is kind of tangential, a little bit to the side, but in the betting market, Taylor is 29, 19, and 3 against the spread for his career. And I know, I don't want to put too much credit in QB wins or anything like that, or think that a quarterback is the only thing that determines how a team performs within the betting market. But consistently, Taylor has been a player who was undervalued, and I think you see that reflected within how the betting market has approached the teams that he has quarterbacked. And I think we see that based on how he's been ranked, based on how he's been kind of treated within the NFL market, going from team to team as a journeyman veteran. I think he's better than the general consensus would imagine. So Taylor going against the Titans, that's a matchup that I can get behind.
Andrew, is it Taylor for you also, or one of these other guys we discussed earlier, Heineke, Mayfield, Simeon, Lawrence, or Goff?
I looked at Mayfield against the Lions, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to start Tyrod Taylor instead.
There you go. Or Tyrod, either Taylor. One of the two.
I'm just hoping he's not Ty Fraud, which he was 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. You're a wordsmith, Erickson. It's very nice today. You're really upping up the game. This is very good. Very stepping it up here. All right, let's talk about the tight end position. I know it's tough to fade any tight end one at this point. I mean, it's kind of this is where we are. It's week 11. It's getting harder and harder here. Just want to find live bodies here. So, Andrew, for you, who are you a little concerned with at the tight end one grouping that you think might be a fade this week, but you can't take him out anyway?
Yeah, it's Kyle Pitts. Just because it's the Bill Belichick mantra. He's going to try to take away your number one weapon. It's pretty clear who the number one weapon on the Atlanta Falcons is. Not even close. Especially if Cordero Patterson is hampered by his ankle injury. I mean, he's going to just put everyone on Kyle Pitts and be like, all right, well, Russell Gage, Alameda Zacchaeus, Tajay Sharp, beat me. And that's a bet that the Patriots are going to take all day long. So the thing with Pitts is the volume has been there. That's not been the issue. It's been just the lack of efficiency, the lack of touchdowns has really kind of held him back. So his last 4 finishes are tight end 2, which is awesome. That's why you're not taking him out of your lineup. But then tight end 35, tight end 14, tight end 14. So that's kind of what you got with Pitts, where he's playing wide receiver. But as Ian Hartitz pointed out on in a tweet, that he's been really good against safeties and linebackers, when he's been playing against as a natural tight end. But when he's playing corners, his yards per route run drops significantly because it's just harder. It's harder just to get open against cornerbacks instead of linebackers and safeties. So it's kind of almost been the reverse of what we thought. We're obsessed with getting these tight ends out in space and using them as receivers. But when you actually are used as a receiver more often than not, then you actually do face tougher defenders on the outside. So kind of a catch-22, but yeah, Pitts, there are concerns. He's not a surefire smash hit, I think, in this matchup on Thursday night.
Dallas Goedert's the one for me, and that's really just because of the concussion, too. Just want to make sure he's healthy enough to play. But you also have seen Devonta Smith the last few weeks start to show out a little bit, and I kind of wonder if maybe a little bit of that, plus the injury, is a bad combination of things for Goedert. When it comes to tight end, how about for you, Matt? Who's somebody that you're a little concerned with this week?
TJ Hockenson. I mean, he looked great before the bye. He had, I believe, 8+ targets, at least 8 targets in 6 of 8 games, and then went into the week 9 bye and came out of it with 1 target in week 10. That is horrifying. But the thing is, you look at what he did before the bye, and you have to acknowledge that within the tight end landscape, there aren't all that many guys consistently getting around 8 targets per game. So there's no way that you bench him just based on what week to week on average he's likely to do. But you just also have to know within that Lions offense, he has the floor. Let me rephrase this. He has a very high floor, but it's creaky. It has some broken pieces in there, and you could step through the floor and just fall into the basement. That is the type of situation we're dealing with Hockenson. So you got to start him, but you just have to know there's maybe a 1 out of 5 chance that this is the game where Hockenson just has 10 yards, and you just have to live with it.
All right. Who should I start? Dallas Goedert, assuming he's healthy and on the field this week, or Dan Arnold? Matt, which one would you start this week?
Oh, man, that's close. With the concussion injuries or the concussion issues with
Goedert.
With Goedert, I would probably actually go with Darnold. With Dan Arnold.
Oh, that's if he's dating Sam Darnold ever, they would just be Darnold. That would just be their relationship name.
Yeah, they're close, but Arnold has actually been a surprisingly good player for the Jags. Over the 6 games now that he's been the number 1 tight end for them. Yeah, I would go with Darnold. Dan Arnold.
I would also go with Darnold and Dan Arnold as well. I'm going that route. How about for you, Goedert or Arnold? Andrew, who's your thoughts here on who should I start?
I mean, I would go with Dan Arnold. I mean, I like, what's the difference between Dan Arnold and TJ Hockenson?
I don't know. Is this a joke? Like you're setting me up for something? Or
no? I mean, they're both getting targets on really bad teams. Like, except
True.
Darnold's just been just as consistent. So I don't know. Yeah, I think that it's pretty close between him and Hockenson, and I would probably start. I would start Dan Arnold over Goedert.
All right, real quick too. Some of the guys on the fringe of tight end: Dawson Knox, Cole Kmet, Evan Ingram, Schultz. Who do you feel best about? Just some of those names, Andrew, if you had to pick one.
What were the names? Schultz?
Knox, Kmet, Evan Ingram, Schultz. Those are kind of the guys in that right outside of tight end 1 territory.
I mean, I still like Schultz a lot. I still think that, he's running a ton of routes. He's running around 91% of Dak Prescott's dropbacks. He's playing in a high-scoring game. Like, he's just got to catch touchdown, like, in your golden. And in the game with the most points, like, that's his best shot of catching a touchdown. So I don't think his value is totally sunk. He was a top 12 tight end last year with all of the Dallas receivers still in play, but without Dak Prescott. So I think that things are going to kind of bounce back and kind of even out a little bit for Schultz. And I do want to mention Cole Kmet, though. I love Cole Kmet, like, rest of season. So if he's, like, on waiver wires, I would definitely want to scoop him up. He's top 10 in routes run per dropback, 3rd in target share since week 7, 21%. Like, it's really hard for tight ends to get, like, a 20% target share. And especially just how bad the position is. There's really not that many of them. And for Cole Kmet, a guy who's kind of, like, flying under the radar, like, that's really impressive. He had season highs in receiving and receptions, targets in week 9 against the Steelers. So I think we're seeing like a second half breakout or second year breakout for Cole Kmet, and we're going to see it here in the second half. So I love the matchup against the Ravens, 3rd most fantasy points allowed to the tight end. So Cole Kmet is someone I definitely want to make sure is on my roster and in my starting lineup.
How about your thoughts on Kmet, Matthew? Because I know I might ask this question in duck after hearing you talk about Justin Fields, but do you think that Cole Kmet is somebody you should be stashing on your bench at least for the rest of the season?
Bench, I don't know, because I wouldn't say you need to stash a number 2 tight end, number 2 fantasy tight end, but this week he is intriguing for sure. Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, the Ravens, that's a very nice matchup for opposing tight ends, and he is getting used within that offense. So I can definitely see the case for Cole Kmet.
All right, let's get to our favorite starts and sits of the week. For me, my favorite start is Michael Gallup because I want to play that total. I keep talking about it. He's a perfectly good flex play this week. He has some touchdown equity because I think everyone does in that game, except for Mecole Hardman, because he's my must-sit of the week. Enough already with the Mecole Hardman. I've had it weeks ago. Why we're still talking about this guy, I don't know. I don't want to talk about him anymore. How about you, Andrew? Who's your favorite start and sit for week 11?
Start Tyler Lockett. Like this, like I'm telling you, like this is the roller coaster that's Tyler Lockett. Like you got to live with the downs if you're going to live with the ups. So you got to eat the bad games because you want to get the good games. I think that he's going to have a massive bounce back game. The air yards were there. The opportunities were all there for him last week. Him and Russ just didn't connect. So he left a lot on the table. I think that he'll bounce back against the Cardinals, who last year he scored, he went over like 200 yards in one game against. So I think that he's in line for a massive game. So do not bench Tyler Lockett. And then I'll say for a sit, I just really don't want to play Jordan Howard. I don't like the matchup against the Saints. I'm just not into it. Maybe Miles Sanders comes back, maybe he doesn't, but still using Boston Scott enough to make me want to shy away from using Jordan Howard. And if he's not involved in the passing game, I just don't see a lot of outs. Like, it's really easy, if they fall behind, it's like, well, he's dead. Like he's not going to go any fantasy points. They need to have like a lead or at least keep the game close. So I'm going to bench Jordan Howard.
Matthew Freedman, your favorite start and sit for week 11.
By the way, that was a parting shot, saving it for the end of the show to be like, you know what? Let me tell you what I think of Jordan Howard. That was rough. That was like a windmill dunk at the very end of the game. So the guy that I would maybe say is my start, my like ironclad start, although I never talk like that. He's not an ironclad start, but someone that I think you should start that you would maybe have reservations about, James Conner, because he underwhelmed last week and what people felt was a smash spot with Chase Edmonds out, and he really didn't perform. He salvaged his day with the touchdown, but that also is a James Conner type of thing to do. He leads the league in touchdowns. He's getting carries near the goal line, and now I think regardless of whether Kyler Murray comes back or not, I think he's in a good spot going against a Seattle defense that is number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I think he's in a great spot. People would maybe be a little uncertain about him this week. I think you lock him in and forget about it. I think he does this week what people were hoping he did last week. And then a guy that I am sitting, let's be honest, I'm not really sitting him. I'm just saying that you need to be aware of him. Amari Cooper. I think this is a CeeDee Lamb game. I think this is maybe a Michael Gallup game. I could see it being an Amari Cooper, like a letdown spot where you think, oh, points all over the place. But the historic spot in which Amari Cooper has really underperformed as a road underdog. And that doesn't happen all that much for the Cowboys, but it's happening in this game. And so, like, I don't know if that's a trend that, like, you should definitely buy into, but I mean, it's enough to make me a little bit skeptical about Amari Cooper this week.
Definitely food for thought. All right, last thing here real quick, gentlemen. New England at Atlanta this week. Mr. Freedman, let me ask the Oracle himself. Who leads the Falcons in rushing yards in this game? Is it Wayne Gallman or is it Mike Davis?
Gallman. I'm just going to say Gallman, but I don't have a strong opinion on it, but I don't think the Falcons are enamored with what they've gotten out of Mike Davis so far.
I can't imagine why. I mean, all right, Andrew, for you, whether Harris plays or not, your thoughts on going back to the Stevenson well and playing him again this week?
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, the matchup is there, and the Patriots feature their running backs a lot. Like, there's a reason why none of their receivers are doing anything. Is because they run the ball a lot and they throw to the running backs collectively a lot. Now, it's not just always one guy, which is why we complain about, Damien Harris, more targets, etc. But it's because they kind of spread the wealth. But the running backs are just like really focal points of their offense, and it's a matchup. The Falcons really can't stop any position particularly. So I think the running backs are in a good spot. And I think that you should start Rhamondre and Damian Harris, as RB2s. I think they're both in really good spots. Harris seems to score a touchdown every single week, and Rhamondre is used more a little bit in the passing game. So I like them both.
And if you've got more questions, we've got answers at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. Check out the Start Sit Assistant and the Autopilot feature there. Both available to you over at fantasypros.com/myplaybook. I want to thank our guests so much for joining us today. The one, the only Matthew Freedman from FTN and Bets Media. You can follow him on the Twitter machine at MattFTheOracle. Matt, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure to hang out with you, and I will review the rest of the standards and practices that your agent sent over, and anything else that I didn't check off, including it looks like a timeshare that now I have to pay for you in the Poconos over the holidays. I will make sure I take care of that because you did such a great job on the show today.
Thanks, guys. And we went 6 minutes over, so you definitely will be paying for that.
I'm paying for it. I'm paying for it already, believe me. All right, that'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Andrew Erickson and Matthew Freedman, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.